Are we good? Okay, awesome. Good morning. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Representative Suzan DelBene of Washington, Chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. She's making her first appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome.
Thank you.
Representative DelBene was born in Selma, Alabama, and moved to Washington as a child. After moving around the country, she landed back in the Pacific Northwest for college and business school, and after that had a career in the private sector before going into politics. She was first elected to Congress in 2012, representing Washington's 1st Congressional District, and became chair of the DCCC in 2022. Today, the Democrats have a real opportunity to retake the House. I'm not saying we're going to ask you about that, where the current balance is 217 Republicans, 213 Democrats, and that's why we're all here today. Again, so welcome.
Thank you.
Now for the ground rules. We're on the record. Please no live blogging or tweeting, and in short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And once the session ends, there's no more embargo. And I should also add that there may be a call for a vote on the Hill, in which case the Congressperson might have to leave a little early. So anyway, we want to keep this brisk, and it might end early. And when we do, if we do make it to 10, she's going to have to leave right away. So no gaggling after we're done. Now, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. This is an incredibly important election. This is about our rights, our freedoms, our democracy, and our future. And that's why we have incredible candidates running across the country, why we have voters who have been very engaged, and why it's so critically important that we win and we take back the gavel so we can move forward and get work done for the American people. We have seen nothing but chaos and dysfunction and extremism this Congress from day one on vote after vote after vote on a speaker's election, being on the brink of a shutdown, brink of a default, brink of a shutdown, speaker votes again, even ongoing attempts to remove the speaker. Folks want to see governance work, and that's going to play a big, significant role at the ballot box. And we know that the agenda that Republicans are pursuing is a very extreme agenda, and that's not in sync with the American people. So we have a map of 65 races across the country. We have 29 frontliners who are the incumbents we have, who are in those purple districts, who have tougher re-elections. We have 20 red to blue candidates who are folks looking to flip seats across the country. And we'll have more as we get through primaries and that are continuing across the country. So we only need 4 more seats to take back the majority, and we are, it was 5, but with the win of Tom Suozzi in New York 3, we're 4 more. So we're working hard to do that and have an incredible opportunity. So happy to take your questions, and thanks for having me.
Sure. All right, well, I'll ask you a few, and then if anybody wants to, after I'm done, just wave at me and I'll make a list. So as you said, you just need a handful of seats to retake the majority. According to the Cook Political Report, the Republicans have actually a slight edge overall, but it's not much of one. Democrats are favored in 203 races and Republicans are favored in 210, which leaves both parties short of 218. So if you could just, how do you map out a path to the majority under those circumstances in such a volatile cycle?
Well, first, I think it's important for folks to know that the focus always is on these purple districts across the country. The redistricting has really made it so that there are a lot of bright red and bright blue districts, but there's 70 or less purple districts across the country that are really the focus. And we have, to start off, there's 16 seats that Republicans are in, where President Biden won in 2020. So that's a incredible opportunity for us. There are a lot of seats in New York and California that are on our map and are great opportunities, but we have opportunities everywhere across the country. Folks who are, folks who want to run to represent their communities and actually make sure that we have governance and folks who are standing up for rights and freedoms. And so we've been able to recruit incredible candidates, and that's why when we look across our map, we've got incredible opportunities in many places, not just these 16 opportunities and these seats that President Biden won, but all across the country. And on the House side, it's every race is a little different. We're not even talking states, we're talking about unique districts. So these are all very unique races, and we have incredible candidates in each of these districts who are running, and that gives us a great opportunity.
I mean, are there any that you can flag that are particularly exciting to you, where you really are feeling good?
Well, I'm excited about all of them.
Okay.
But I will say that we have, and there's been a lot of focus, understandably, on races in New York and California, but we have races all across the country. We have 2 opportunities in Iowa with Christina Bohannon and Lenon Bacan running in Iowa, Tony Vargas running against Don Bacon in Nebraska, Monica Tranel running in Montana. I mean, we just I could go around the country, and we have opportunities now, strong opportunities to pick up seats, another Democratic seat in Alabama, and given the recent Supreme Court decision in Louisiana. So those are also places where the black vote hasn't been represented in those states, and with the Supreme Court upholding the Voting Rights Act, now we have opportunities to pick up an additional seat in Alabama, an additional seat in Louisiana.
Right. So what is the impact of President Biden's unpopularity on races down ballot?
So first, when you go across the country and talk to folks, I think a huge issue for folks is the economic opportunity that they have. Folks want to not just be able to get by, but to get ahead. And when you really talk to folks about what the policies are, what we need to do to continue to support folks, they understand not only that the president has been working hard, the incredible work we did last Congress on infrastructure, on the Inflation Reduction Act, and reducing prescription drug prices, CHIPS and Science Act, and bringing manufacturing jobs back. But when we continue to talk to folks about the work that's been done and the work that can be done if we have a functional Congress who's focused on the needs of the people, folks are with us. And so we need to continue to talk to folks and make sure they are aware of the work that's been done and is still being done to move forward, and what the opportunities are. But there couldn't be a bigger contrast in this election. There is a stark contrast. And when we talk to folks about not only the policies we can do to develop ongoing economic opportunities across the country, but also to protect our rights, and clearly reproductive rights are going to be on the ballot across the country. The policies to make sure that we are addressing what we see at the border. President Biden's been at the table trying to move forward. It's Republicans who have been thwarting policy over and over and over again. So I think we have an incredible opportunity, and I think people continue to see that when they sit down and are going to make that choice on their ball.
So if President Biden loses in November, can the Democrats still retake the House?
Well, first of all, I think President Biden's going to win.
Okay.
And I think that each of our races are unique races where the candidates are running. We have 5 seats where we're in districts that President Trump won in 2020, and so all of these areas are very unique. These districts where authentic candidates win, and we're going to continue to fight each of those races individually across the country. And I think you're going to continue to see us hold or pick up seats all across the country because of the great candidates that we have.
So does anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Seth. Seth McLaughlin from Washington Times.
On the economy, because polls show that President Biden is not faring well with the economy. Why isn't that resonating with folks more, and what do you have to do to kind of turn that trend around?
Well, I think folks need to understand who's done the work to help, for example, on those projects that are helping to fix roads, put broadband in place, all of that work was because of the work of President Biden and Democrats in Congress. But you've all seen Republicans go to ribbon cuttings and take credit for projects that they voted against. We need to continue to make sure people really know who's done the work, that are making differences in their communities. And we have to continue to talk about the work that we still can do if we have a functional Congress. There's a lot more we can do on issues of affordable housing or childcare, top issues that we see that impact families. These are things where there are great policy ideas we can move forward on, but Republicans aren't interested in moving forward on policy right now. They can't even agree with each other on most things. They can't even pass a rule to move a bill. So you over and over hear folks talk about this being a do-nothing Congress. We have a Republican majority that's been ruled by chaos and dysfunction, and folks want to see governance work. And I think that is a fundamental thing I've seen in every part of the country that I've gone to, and I hear regularly from folks who aren't just identify themselves as Democrats. Even a lot of folks who might have said they were Republicans aren't sure what they are now because they feel like their party has left them. They want to see governance work, and they want folks who are going to be serious about legislating. And House Democrats have been doing that all of this Congress, and we have great candidates that can help us take that majority so that we can have those gavels and actually govern again.
And what about the slipping poll numbers of black voters in particular? How concerning is that, and what do you do to turn that around?
Well, we actually at the DCCC, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that we're engaging communities of color in our districts, and part of that has been doing a lot of work to understand where people are getting their information and where their trusted information is coming from, because it can be very different in different parts of the country. It isn't just broadcast TV. A lot of folks are on social media, and there are local leaders who have a big impact. So we have been working with local leaders, looking at the kind of types of media that people look at to get their information, and working to make sure that we're communicating directly with them there. So in New York 3, the recent special election in Tom Suozzi's district, we had folks working very closely, and Congresswoman Grace Meng was very influential here, making sure that we were connecting with the AAPI community there, making sure that we were providing information in appropriate languages to communicate with folks, to make sure that we were talking to community leaders to get information out. And so we have a full effort that we have across the DCCC. We call it Power the People, to make sure that we're targeting those communities and getting them information, because that is number one. People know what we've been working on, what we're doing, and what our candidates stand for. We win.
Okay, over to your left. I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. I'm Jennifer Schott from State's Newsroom. I wanted to ask you a little bit about these purple districts that you all are focusing on. Some of them are in states where there are going to be abortion access ballot questions directly on voters' ballots in November. So what do you think impact, if any at all, it's going to have on those purple races? And then I have a quick follow-up to that as well.
Okay, well, first of all, I think we have about 11 states where it's likely that reproductive rights will be on the ballot, but we also know that it's been on the ballot many, many times already. Since November of 2022, we've had special election after special election, whether it's initiatives, a state Supreme Court case in Wisconsin, the local elections last November, over and over since November of 2022, and since the Dobbs decision, we've seen overperformance on Democratic races. Kansas, Ohio, Virginia State Assembly, Wisconsin Supreme Court race, and even Tom Suozzi's race, that was a 15-point swing in just over a year. And so Alabama, after the Alabama Supreme Court decision on in vitro fertilization, we saw a special election in a state House race there. That was over a 30-point swing where a Democrat won in that state House race after the Dobbs decision, and because people more and more are seeing that their rights are at risk, and that all the things that Republicans said about it being a states' rights issue, et cetera, that's clearly not true. They want a national abortion ban. So I think we've seen huge turnout as a result of that over and over in elections since November of 2022. And I have no doubt we're going to continue to see that all the way through. This is a huge issue for voters, and the American people are with us. Folks support women's reproductive rights across the country, and that's going to be a huge issue. And for some people, it is the issue. It's a bright line issue. It's an issue where they're only going to vote for someone if they support reproductive rights. So it absolutely is going to be an important issue, I'd argue whether or not it's on the ballot.
And just a quick follow-up, if that's all right.
Sure.
The Cook Political Report is forecasting between 1 and 4 Senate seats flip to Republican control. And so we are in a situation where right now the dynamic is that we'd potentially have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, which is of course still divided government. And I know that Democrats, especially since the Dobbs case, have talked specifically about reinstating Roe and the protections nationwide under Roe. But can you talk a little bit about what you all would hope to do if you had a Democratic House and potentially a Republican Senate in that sort of middle ground potentially?
Well, we're going to fight to make sure we have a strong majority in the House. We passed the Women's Health Protection Act last Congress with a Democratic majority in the House to make sure that we are putting into law the protections of Roe. And so that will be one of our top priorities, to make sure that we pass the Women's Health Protection Act again. But I'm also hopeful that we will keep the Senate and be able to move forward, but that's a top priority in the House.
Annette Meiritz from Handelsblatt.
Yes, thank you. I'm interested in the role of young voters and how you plan to reach them, because they will be so crucial for this election, like in the 2022 midterm elections. So how are you planning to reach them, and are Democratic candidates in general use TikTok as a medium to reach them, and how do you balance that with a TikTok bill passed by Congress?
So, and I was talking about kind of how we engage and media engagement, it's critically important, and you're going to see a lot of movement towards digital media, social media, et cetera, in terms of communication, because that's where a lot of people get their information. Folks have been focusing in different areas. I think we have some folks who continue to regularly engage on TikTok. We have folks who don't. I think that's a decision that individual campaigns are going to make, but we know that it's really important not only that we engage where people are getting the information, but people are present and talking to voters, going out and engaging with young voters, working as kind of similar to what I was saying, who are the important leaders in communities that folks talk to make sure that people understand what's at stake. I mean, I said this election is about our rights, our freedoms, our democracy, and our future. And our future is also, it's our young people's future. And making sure that they realize, because generally they have been folks who haven't filled out their ballots, how critically important it is that they want their voice to be heard, they gotta vote. And I can say, when I've talked to young people, even high schoolers who are gonna be voting in their first presidential election and maybe their first election at all this November, they have been very engaged for a variety of issues. And the issues that young people care about also are very similar. Economic opportunity is number one across all age groups when we talk to folks across the country, and also making sure that we're talking about rights and freedoms, and clearly climate is important because this is the future of the planet that they live on and future generations are. So these are all important issues where.
Yeah, just a very quick follow-up, I promise. But what about the Gaza issue? Do you get a lot of response on the campaign trail with Democratic candidates? We see what's happening on the campus nationwide. Can you talk a little bit about that, how the vibe is out there, and how do you deal with it right now?
Well, first I just want to highlight that we have seen a dramatic rise in anti-Semitism across the country. We all, and this should be bipartisan, to speak out against hate wherever we see it in our country. But when we talk to young voters, as I said a minute ago, still across the board, their number one issue is making sure that they are going to have economic opportunity going forward, and that they're going to be in a position where they can have the same opportunities that their parents did, that they're going to have the same rights and freedoms that their parents did. You know, when we talk about reproductive rights, this is a huge issue in terms of making sure that young women have the same rights that I did growing up. So these are critical issues, and we talk to people about the issues that they care about. Democrats are actually talking about these issues. We're actually talking about policy that we can work on going forward. And I think, you know, what we've seen from Republicans is they want to break things and then they want to blame someone for it, usually blames Democrats for that, but they have not been interested in governing or moving forward solutions to help our country and our communities move forward. And that's going to play a significant role, I'd say across the board, but definitely with young people too.
To your right, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Maeve Sheehy from Bloomberg Government. I just wanted to bring it back to the border for a second. We saw Tom Suozzi talk about the border a lot more than Democrats have in the past during his special election, which obviously was successful for him. I'm just curious, how are you advising frontline Democrats to talk about the border when they're facing opponents who this is like their number one issue that the Republicans think they'll win on?
Well, this is another really important issue across the country, and you're absolutely right. Tom Suozzi talked about it. He knew it was an important issue. He took it head on. He talked about the work he had done in the past, the work that he would still do going forward to really make a difference for the community and for the country. And the Republican candidate was nowhere to be seen, nowhere talking about issues, just disappeared. And so absolutely it makes a difference that people are present, that they're talking about issues and they're talking about what they can do on any issue, and absolutely that's true on the border too. And he also highlighted, which I think we will continue to highlight over and over again, that there was a bipartisan deal on the table and Republicans walked away. You know, President Biden was there, you know, working on that deal with Republicans and Democrats, a bipartisan deal, and they walked away, and some Republicans even talked about it as well. We can't do this because it might be a win for President Biden. What about putting the American people first, and what's the right thing to do there? So back to my point that Republicans aren't interested in governing, I actually think this is one where where we can make that point very clearly, and people have seen that. And I think it's, you know, been 100 days since they tanked the border bill, and still we haven't seen proposals on what Republicans would do instead, except to try to inflame an issue, which seems to be the only thing they have been focused on doing this Congress.
And how will President Biden? So the story is that he's just going to announce a bunch of measures, and I guess Chuck Schumer is going to reintroduce the immigration bill to sort of pave the way.
Well, I think, you know, Congress has an important role to play here. Mm-hmm. And so as a member of Congress, looking from Congress, we have an important legislative role that we should be playing. And for anything to pass, anything this Congress, it's got to be bipartisan. Mm-hmm. And so for folks to say it has to be my way or no way, which is what Republicans have said, that means they don't want to do anything. And people want to see governance work. They want to see folks come together, and they know that to get a bill done, it's got to get through the House and the Senate and to the president's desk. Mm-hmm. And folks worked very hard to come up with an agreement that could get through the Senate, at least that was the proposal, that would get through the House and get to the president's desk that he would support, and Republicans blew it up. And they were at the table. So that's the only way we can govern, and Congress needs to do its part, and Republicans refuse to participate.
But if Congress can't do its part, then President Biden needs to just do what he can on his own.
I think, you know, the president will continue to do what he can, but I think that we have an important role to play. And frankly, since I came to Congress, comprehensive immigration reform was a top priority when I came. I actually led on a bill to do comprehensive immigration reform when I first came. And there was a bill that passed the Senate and the House refused to take it up, and it would have passed. But that's our challenge, and that was under Speaker Boehner. If Republicans want to be at the table and legislating, are serious about legislating, then they'll be working in a bipartisan fashion. But they're not interested in doing that, and clearly there was a attempt to do that, and Republicans backed away.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Mary Ellen with Roll Call. I wanted to ask, ahead of the primary in Oregon next week, you all have supported Janelle Bynum to try to take on Lori Chavez DeRemer there. Curious if Jamie McLeod-Skinner is the winner on Tuesday, do you foresee the D-Trib supporting her, and do you kind of see this maybe being a race where you guys get more involved behind her than you did 2 years ago when she came, I think, within 2,000 votes, fairly close margin. But I don't think this was one of the races that the D-Trib was as invested in as some of the others.
So absolutely, I think we can win in Oregon, and I think Janelle Bynum actually beat Lori Chavez DeRemer twice in state legislative races. Janelle's an incredibly strong candidate, and that's why we put her on the red to blue list, and she's got strong support from from elected officials in Oregon, leaders in Oregon. So she's in a really strong position. But the primary's coming up on Tuesday, so this still absolutely is a district I think we can win. And so we'll see the results of the primary, and then we'll make our plans in terms of how we're going to proceed going forward to make sure that we win that seat.
Do you think you can win with either of those candidates? Obviously, you've backed Bynum, but
right. I think we're supporting Janelle Bynum, and we'll see what happens after the primary. But I absolutely think we can win that seat.
Arit John from CNN to your left.
Hi.
Just a follow-up to that, could you just talk more broadly about the recruitment strategy, especially in those 5 and 16 districts? And in 2020, the strategy was really recruiting a lot of veterans, a lot of national security folks to sort of combat what was happening in the White House. And so this time around, what's sort of been the strategy for recruitment?
So we've actually looked at individual districts and really been thoughtful about those districts and the important priorities in those districts, and also the incredible candidates that are out there, or other leaders that are out there who would be great members of Congress. In some cases, we had folks who had ran last cycle who are running again. And you've seen that in a few cases. Tony Vargas, I was talking about in Nebraska, is running again. I actually think we've had incredible momentum from folks who ran great campaigns last Congress who are running again now and have that extra name ID, strong campaign operations, and came straight off the last election and are doing an incredible job going forward. Now, I might be a little biased. I ran for Congress the first time I ran. I lost. I ran again and won, and it made a huge that first campaign made a big difference in the success of my second campaign too. So in some of those cases, we have folks who were already, were great candidates and are running again and have incredible momentum. Our candidates are on average, both our red to blue candidates and our frontline incumbents who are running for re-election have been outraising Republicans. The last 2 quarters, they've outraised Republicans, so they have momentum. They've got the resources and are in a great position. But we have incredibly diverse candidates running across the country, which is something we're really proud of, and I think they all uniquely speak to the needs and issues in their districts, and I'm excited to see them as future colleagues.
Have you seen a decline at all in donations from Jewish donors in light of the situation in Israel?
I don't know
and Gaza?
the answer. I know we've been
You
out
don't know.
raising
Right.
and had strong support, but I don't.
You don't know.
I can't give you any specific breakdown of that.
Okay. Next to Maeve, right. And could you introduce yourself?
Max Laren with Punchbowl News. I know it's a DCCC policy to protect incumbents and support incumbents. There is an extraordinary case in South Texas, however, with Henry Cuellar, who's been indicted on bribery and many corruption charges. What is your stance on that race, and is the DCCC committing to providing resources if that gets close and you need to support Cuellar?
So we need to let the legal process play out, and that process is moving forward, but he is innocent until proven guilty, and they're going to continue the legal process there. That race isn't on our map because we feel like it's a strong district that we will keep and continue to see it that way.
James Downs from National Journal.
Yeah, good to see you, Congresswoman. You recently put a memo in the Wall Street Journal about immigration and how you can win on immigration. You mentioned 3 members of Congress, Hillary Scholten, Gabe Vasquez, Chris Deluzio, as sort of models to talk about immigration. Why them? What do they bring to the table that makes them so strong, specifically when it comes to immigration policy?
I actually think there's a lot of folks that we can talk about who have been really strong, but I think, always we want to, highlight the incredible work happening with our frontliners and the important positions they've taken and the leadership they've shown on issues that are important to their communities. And so, this is an issue that's important to the communities they represent, and they want to see policy move and are willing to talk about, just like we talked about with Tom Suozzi. They came to Congress to get things done. And I think there's a huge frustration across our caucus that I share, that we want to get things done, and we're here in a Congress where Republicans have no interest in getting anything done. And so we want to make sure the American people know and continue to highlight that Democrats, and these are great examples of strong Democrats who have policy proposals, have ideas on what we can do moving forward, and that we're continuing to push to try to make progress, even with Republicans who are doing everything possible to prevent progress. So that's why we'll continue to highlight their work and work of others of our colleagues as well.
Of Ken Tran from USA Today.
Thank you. You mentioned economy and reproductive rights as really important issues for your candidates. The Biden campaign is also really heavily focusing on democracy as a whole. Can you tell us a little bit about how much and how hard your candidates will run on that issue compared to the 2 I've mentioned before? Well,
it is a critically important issue all across the country, and I even started with our rights, our freedoms, and our democracy. I was born in Selma, Alabama. When we talk about making sure we're standing up for people's access to the ballot, their right to vote, this has really been fundamental, and it's been something that we have continued to stand up for and propose in terms of legislation to make sure that we have strong support for voting rights. And we've seen Republicans try to undermine access to the ballot in states across the country. And we have a Republican presidential candidate who continues to deny a free and fair election, who continues to talk about his unwillingness to accept a result of an election if it's not going to be the results that he wants. So talking about democracy and how important it is that we uphold our democracy and our values and voting rights absolutely is going to continue to be part of the country, because when we talk about that sharp contrast, this is a key part of that sharp contrast in terms of where Democrats stand and wanting to uphold our democracy and uphold voting rights, and where Republicans are, where a litmus test seems to be that to be a good Republican right now, that you have to say that you would deny the last presidential election. So that's where they are. And I might highlight too that even during this session, this week while we've been in session, Republicans have gone out of the way, including the Speaker of the House, to go up to New York to dress like the former president, to go sit in a courtroom with him, as opposed to stand up for the needs of their communities and do their work here in Congress. So that shows you and probably tells you all you need to know about where Republicans are at. There's no original ideas. They all are just waiting to have Donald Trump tell them what to do next. And if his position on election rights is any example, that should put great concern to folks across the country in terms of what that means for our democracy.
Jonathan Nicholson from HuffPost, to your right.
Thanks for doing this. Just getting back to democracy for a little bit, how much are you advising candidates to include Ukraine in that messaging about democracy? Do you see that as one thing? And are there any specific races or regions that you think that that plays particularly significant roles in terms of either Ukrainian community or military bases and so on?
It absolutely has been an important issue, and I think folks have been highlighting it across the country, and with not only with local Ukrainian communities in their districts, but just in terms of what it means when we talk about standing up for our values and our shared values with our allies, and frankly, what even that means for national security going forward. This is a case where legislation could have moved months and months ago. Instead, Mike Johnson held up legislation from moving for no reason. In fact, what we ended up passing could have been passed months and months ahead of time. When we talk about folks' inability and unwillingness to govern, this is a really an egregious example of that, of the incredible consequences of his inability to even make a decision on how to move forward. We need leaders. So this is absolutely something we'll continue to highlight and bring up. And frankly, we've heard from our communities because they wonder why there can't be movement and a decision made on something that should be so clear, and I think has been really clear to the American people. Yeah, the Republicans overall seem to be willing to defend and be apologists for Vladimir Putin, but the American people think we should be standing up for our democracy, for rights and freedoms, for supporting Ukraine and our allies. And Republicans are unable to govern, and we're unwilling to govern here until just huge pressure. And frankly, it's Democrats who've really continued to stand up and help move us forward, even in the minority. And that's been important leadership, and we've been the ones who've been able to move important policy because we are willing to stand up.
Are there any particular races or regions, though, where you think would be?
Yeah. I think it clearly is important. I think it is an important issue across the country, but there are definitely folks who, look at Marcy Kaptur in Ohio. She's been a strong voice standing up for support for Ukraine, but I actually think it's been something that's been important for our candidates everywhere, and frankly, important to our communities everywhere in terms of what it means in terms of our willingness to stand up and support our allies.
Krista Case Bryant from the Monitor, to your right.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for being here, Congresswoman. You spoke about how a number of voters who maybe used to identify as Republican are now not sure what they are. And I'm just curious, in this time of just such intense polarization and a very narrowly divided House and Senate, how are you coaching frontliners and those challengers in red districts to maybe signal to those sort of homeless former Republican voters, hey, there's big enough, our tent is big enough for you, we're not as ideologically, monolithic as some people might say, is that part of your messaging, and how are you looking to include them in your base of support?
It is absolutely part of what I think our candidates not only have continued to do, but really what they represent and why they've won in districts that might look tough on paper. Just take my colleague Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in Southwest Washington, a district that no one thought a Democrat was going to win in. She won, and a lot of that support was from folks, independents, kind of those former Republicans, others, because she was an authentic candidate who spoke up with her point of view on what she would do, and people trust her, and they still do. And we have 5 Democrats in seats that President Trump won in 2020. Marcy Kaptur, who we talked about before, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, Mary Peltola in Alaska, Matt Cartwright in Pennsylvania, Jared Golden in Maine, all who have won in these districts because they are trusted, authentic candidates who represent their region, and they have had strong support. And I do think that the reason they do is because people want a representative that they can trust, not always one who is going to agree with everything. In fact, in districts like that, there's nothing you can do. Whatever you do, probably someone will disagree with you. That's the nature of these purple districts. But they want to know that people are thoughtful, are listening, and can explain why they made the decisions they did. And absolutely, those are important role models to follow in terms of these districts, and it's something that's been really important for our candidates and why they've been successful.
And do you feel like once those, in this Congress that we're just finishing up now, have those frontliners been able to take those viewpoints that from their districts that help get them elected and share those and sort of get some traction with those maybe more diverse viewpoints within the Democratic caucus in Congress?
Well, I was a frontliner when I first got elected, representing a very similar district, and I do think that you're a better legislator when you hear differing points of view and are forced to try to come up with what the right solution is, the best solution for your community, knowing that there's no answer that just is going to automatically, kind of do everything for everyone, because there is no way to do that. The question is, what is the best step to move forward? And hearing different points of view really helps you kind of figure out maybe this idea you thought of originally isn't as perfect as you thought, and you didn't consider this other issue. And so I think not only is that important in terms of our engagement with folks and members of our communities, but in our engagement between members of Congress, because when we have those debates, and frankly those healthy debates are really important, but it would be great if we were having those healthy bipartisan debates too, to talk about how we move forward. And that's where it's been really disappointing to see the end of moderate Republicans. There just aren't any left in Congress. They got beat in primaries, they've resigned and left. They don't feel like their party has a home for them anymore. And so we've ended up in a place where the Republican Party, and definitely in the House, has been taken over by the most extreme members of their caucus. That's their voice. There is no room for debate or talking about thoughtful policy. And for governance to really work, we need people who are serious about coming to the table to legislate. So obviously within the Democratic caucus having that, but I think I'd love to see us get to, back to a place where we have folks who are willing to do that on both sides of the aisle. But frankly, as long as Republicans seem to think that their only role is to follow the word of Donald Trump and not kind of ever be able to express a differing point of view, if that's going to continue to be the Republican Party, then we need to show them that and the American people across the board that we reject that. And if that's who they're going to be, then they're not going to be representing us, and they're not going to be holding the gavels in the House of Representatives.
To my left, Story Hinckley from the Monitor.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you see your role. When you came into this position, was there anything that you immediately identified as something that you would do differently from your predecessor from a leadership perspective? Anything that you immediately identified as an area that could be improved?
So things can always be improved. I think no matter what you do, the number one, and I spent a lot of time running organizations before I became a member of Congress, so I approached the DCCC similarly, looking at what worked, what didn't work. Last time and many cycles before, what have we learned from that? What can we do better? How have things changed? There might have been things we've done in the past that worked well, but we've talked a lot about where people get information and how that has changed over time. That changes campaigns, and so what do we need to do to evolve the way that we approach races and how campaign work to actually keep up to date with the way the world works today? That can be hard because people can be very ingrained with the way that things always have been, and maybe because I've had a lot of experience and background working in innovative new industries that have kind of changed things. I think I bring that lens to the DCCC too. And then listening to our colleagues across the board about kind of what they've learned, what's worked, what doesn't work. But I've got to say all of these races are a little different, and definitely as someone who came to Congress representing a swing district and was a frontliner in a targeted race in my first re-election. I know how important it is to make sure that we not only have great candidates, but make sure that folks are running the races that are authentic to them. So it's not so much that we have a cookie cutter mentality. We are able to think uniquely about what we can do to support them, let them run their race, and make sure that they're in a strong position to get their message out. And that we build a great team, because part of the work of the DCCC is making sure we have a great team that can engage and work with our candidates across the country, and I think we've been able to build a great team of folks internally that you don't hear about all the time that are doing important work. And so that's really, really important to me too, because we can only do and deliver on our goals if we build a strong team to do that. And just as someone who, like I said, who's run organizations before, that was a huge priority for me too.
Brian Bennett from Time to your right.
Hi.
What were your takeaways from the Republican primaries, from the exit polling, particularly the Nikki Haley vote? What's been your takeaways? Are there any openings for Democrats in messaging that come out of that in order to reach some of those Nikki Haley voters in districts, particularly the 5 Trump districts?
Well, I think something that we were just talking about, which is kind of how there are a lot of traditional Republicans out there who have no home, who are looking for an alternative to the extremism and dysfunction that we see from the MAGA Republicans who've taken over, and how at the heart of that is people want to see governance work, and they want folks who are going to listen and talk about ideas, and that's why having candidates who are actually going to engage on tough issues and talk about them and talk about the kind of what can we do in Congress at least to help address these issues, and where people feel like they can have an honest exchange, that's really, really important. And it's not just important for former Republicans, it's important for everyone to feel that they have a representative who's going to listen and they trust that they're going to make a good decision based on that information. So I think it validates some of what we've been talking about before, that there's a lot of disaffected folks on the Republican side who aren't sure what happened to their party, who want to see folks who are interested in governing, and they're looking for candidates who are going to do that. And I think, for example, those 5 candidates I was talking about in the Trump districts have been great examples of that.
In those districts, are you concerned that voters could split their ballots, so not vote for Trump, but then vote for a Republican candidate down ballot? How are you handling those voters that might be interested in transport?
Our job is to turn out the vote and make sure our candidates win. And the reason I say that is, there are some places where we might overlap with where there's going to be more of a focus, a district that might be a focus for the presidential election. But we also have a lot of races in places where you're not going to see as much of a focus on the presidential side, because it's people, in New York or California, where the presidential race, I think these are strong blue states, but our individual congressional districts can look very different. And so we're going to have a focus there, and the focus is on those congressional races, and there may not be as much of that national focus there versus Michigan or Nevada, where you may see not Senate races and the presidential race also play a big role. So we have to look at that kind of from the different perspectives depending on where the races are in terms of what it means, the work that we need to do to help turn out the vote, and the infrastructure we need to help build on those campaigns versus other places where there may be kind of more shared efforts. And so it's going to be different for us depending on what part of the country we're talking about.
Let's see, next to Brian at the end, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Jamie Steen from Creative Syndicate. First Monitor breakfast, thank you. Congresswoman, how closely are you coordinating with Democratic Senate races, to pick up on this point? Do you have daily or weekly discussions with?
So we talk, we absolutely talk with our colleagues, we talk with state parties, we talk with folks about work that's happening. Are there places where we are doing work that is shared work, places where we're going to do things that are different. If you look at a statewide race, they might have particular parts of the state that they're really focused on. that may or may not be places that we have congressional districts where we're focused on, and so sometimes there may be synergies, sometimes there may be not. It also kind of depends on candidates and kind of how they want to run their campaigns. So, but yes, we talk to folks and understand what's happening, and both with folks of the DNC, look at what's happening on Senate side and what's happening within a state in terms of what they're doing on local elections, could be governor races, things like that, that are also, or initiatives that might be on the ballot to really inform us what else is happening and what else is going to be on the ballot in that particular district.
And then next to Jamie, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm Stephen Gross with the Associated Press.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you along the lines of purple districts. This week we saw a number of Democrats from purple districts voting for legislation that condemned Biden policies on Israel at the border. And how important do you think it is that those Democrats differentiate themselves from some of those policies that might not be popular back home?
So I think they all are going to bring their point of view in terms of what they think needs to be done. That's what they should do. Folks want them to be a strong voice for their community and stand up for the policies they think are right for their communities. And so in all of these cases, we were talking about swing districts and places where people hear differing points of view. They're going to make decisions on what they think is best for their districts, and we want them to stand up and talk about what positions they think, what policies we should move, and they may have disagreements with the administration in some cases not. Whatever that may be, they are speaking up for their communities. So that's really important, because there is no one singular point of view, especially in purple districts. And so I think it's really important for candidates to make sure that they're willing to stand up for their communities and are a unique voice for their communities.
Just to follow up, at the top you mentioned Nebraska, Iowa, Montana, all of those, Trump will almost certainly win. How specifically do Democrats in those states outperform Biden on the ballot?
Well, let's be clear, we've had strong fundraising. I was talking about how our candidates, especially these first 2 quarters of this year, have been outraising their Republican opponents on average, that we have, even like a Don Bacon in Nebraska won his primary by 60%, which was a pretty weak showing on his side. And Tony Vargas is running a really strong campaign in a great position. So if you continue to look at each of these races, we've got Republicans who have kind of called themselves these traditional moderates, and they're just not. Don Bacon has tried to scrub his website on his positions on reproductive rights. There is no moderate there. And we want to make sure not only we hold Republicans accountable for their positions, and people are aware of that, but also show there's another option, which is to elect someone who actually is focused on the needs of the community and hasn't kind of decided to give their vote to whatever the former president or extreme leaders in the House have told them to do. So that's really important. I think that's where we have an incredible opportunity, and that's why I think you're going to see us win in districts like that.
Okay, final question, Lauren Fedor from the Financial Times, to your left.
Thank you for doing this. Just to follow up, Israel has come up a couple of times, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you're advising candidates to kind of navigate this issue. It's obviously divided the party. I'm also interested in how concerned you are about this weighing on younger voters in particular. Anything you can say, just elaborating a bit more about how you're advising your candidates and how they should tackle it.
So I get asked a lot about how we're advising candidates, and I think my advice for candidates has always been it's important for you to have an authentic voice and talk about what you would do, how you feel on issues, because people can tell if someone's scripted and not really talking about their feelings. And on such an important issue, I think it's really important that people talk authentically about their positions, what they think needs to happen, and also, frankly, call out the cynicism that we've seen from Republicans who, even this most recent piece of legislation they put on the floor on Israel had nothing to do with helping to address an issue. It was a political move on their part, and to highlight that on a very serious issue that we should be talking about with our communities, Republicans continue to put their politics first. And so I think that's important, and we want to continue to hold Republicans accountable for not putting the needs of people in their community first. And then on the contrast is really stark, and we will continue to make that case on that contrast. When you are going to vote, you're going to have a choice between, a candidate who's going to stand up for your rights and your freedoms, and a candidate who, frankly, is only willing to support extreme views. And I'm saying that generically, yet that seems to be the case we have in every district across the country. And I think for young people who are really sincerely concerned about what the future looks like for their families, for their peers, their communities, what the world looks like in the future, it's really important that they're able to have representatives who they can engage with, who share their values moving forward. And I think that's going to continue to be the conversation, because not voting, just stepping aside, means you're letting someone else decide for you, and the consequences of that can be pretty damaging if we are in a place where we lose our rights, our freedoms, and our democracy.
Are you worried about turnout for younger voters?
I always am going to do everything you can to get turnout, because I think turnout's critical, and traditionally younger voters haven't turned out as much, so that absolutely is a top priority.
All right, well, I know you need to get to the Hill.
Yes.
Thank you so much for doing this, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.